And we're back, and it's Comp 1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals, and it's Week 4, Lesson 4, Part 2. And last time we just talked about briefly, although it messed up online, about our web project overview slide. And what I'll do is, just for people who don't have it, later on today I'll put it up inside your Blackboard if you ever want to take a look at that as a reference guide. So you can use that for your business, right? If you're going to do that kind of stuff. Now you may decide not to be a web developer, and that's totally cool. But it's kind of my duty to kind of talk to you about it and say, hey, if this is what you want to do, we're talking about the web. Some people may love the web and some people hate the web. They're like, I never want to do HTML5 or CSS or JavaScript again, right? And that's totally cool. But this is a really cool part where you can actually make some money. And before you actually get into let's say another job that you might have. You can also have this as a side job. Some people do a lot of websites for people because they know how to do them, as an example. And that's, at least it gives you a plan so that way you don't lose your shirt and when you try and do somebody a favor. Okay, let's create another project here. So I'm going to kind of do a new repository up on GitHub, which we're going to call COMP1002. And then it's going to be lesson 4, right? That's what I want to do. And I've got my repository up online. Last time I've been doing everything so far with my repositories here, and they've been. I started off on my local machine, so let's say I have some local folder in my messy desktop, and then what I do is when I'm done, right, I kind of use some kind of terminal or whatever to connect with GitHub and upload to GitHub. We'll do it the other way around today. I'll use my GitHub client to do it. So I've created a kind of a little folder up online as an example, right? And one thing I want to do here is, if I want to add more files at this stage, because I've got these kind of things right now. One thing I don't have is a README file, as an example, and I can add this in. Here's my README, and the README file tells my repository what I'm doing. So this is my repo for lesson 4. Web and Internet Fundamentals, and it's at at Georgian, if I can spell. Okay. Cool. So I add that as a commit because I accept the change, and now I've got this one file up online. And what I want to do is I want to click this clone in desktop instead of using command line. So I clone in desktop, which launches my application, which I agree with. And when it opens up, it gives me my desktop, and it tells me, wait, where do you want to put this? I want to put it on my desktop. I want to call it this, COMP1002 Lesson 4. This is the information I'm getting from GitHub Online. And I'm going to click clone. And when I do that, it pulls the information down. Now I've got my README file. So everything through the tool now. I'm not using the command line. So the tool is a lot easier to use for people who don't like command line. So that's what I've done. I've kind of got a repo going on. And now every time I make a change to my local folder, it's going to reflect here in GitHub. All right, let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I go back now to my folder, which is right here. This is the new one that I just got from online. And I kind of double click on it, I can see that I got my README file. Let's say I want to add my structure for my folder structure today, like we normally do. So again, I'm going to add in a couple folders. One of them is going to be called my content folder, right, for my CSS. I'm going to put another folder in there for assets. If you follow along, this is cool. I'm going to also share it online in a second. I'm also going to put another folder in here for scripts, because I think those are really important folders to have. And in my assets, I might break that down to, again, some kind of images. I might include a fonts folder as an example. I might include in there some audio, if I have some audio that I want to include, or video, some kind of multimedia. I might have those in there as well, those folders, right? And I'm going to start putting stuff together. So let's just close this one off. I'm going to open up brackets, right? And remember how we did brackets before, right? So how do I use brackets? I drag and drop. Again, I'm just using one tool, brackets. Drag and drop here into brackets, and now I have my folder structure. And of course, what I want to do in my main root is I want to add a new file, which is my index.html file, which is kind of blank, right? So I want to add in some stuff. And in the quiz, I asked you, what's the order of the stuff that you have to add in? And this is the order. My doc type first, right? Which is HTML, right? And then I want to have the head of the HTML first, then the head of my document, right? And then some kind of body tag. Those are the things you should think about first. There's my body. And inside my head, I'm probably going to have some kind of meta tag, right? Is UTF-8, right? And then the title, right? Here's my title, which is today something to do with HTML5 forms. That's what my title is for today, right? And then, of course, I might have some kind of other things like a CSS document that I want to tie in. So let's add a phantom CSS. We haven't done CSS yet, cascading style sheets or styling, but we will coming up. Let me right-click on my. If I go to my content and I say new file, I can add in a main.css or app.css, whatever you want to call it. I can go back to my document now, and now that I've added a main.css, I can include it, right, by putting in some kind of link where the rel is equal to a style sheet, if I can put it in, right, and the href is equal to, if you notice, it gives me a kind of my folder structure here. I'm looking at my content folder, and under my content folder, I want main. Here it is, right? .css. There's my style sheet I've linked in, right? So those are the basic things that I've got here in my the main head of my website. And then I can add other ones too. Another meta tag that we like to add in. I didn't test you on this, but we could say something like this: name is equal to viewport, right? And content is equal to width is equal to device width. Initial scale is equal to 1, right? And again, I talked about this as something that's required for mobile these days because it tells you, when I look at this viewport meta tag, it says, hey, when my viewport size changes, when I move from desktop to a mobile device, right, my viewport size is different, right? So read how wide it is so that you can reflow my content into a smaller screen. That's what this meta tag does for us, right? All right, so that's the second meta tag I want to put in there. And then finally I get into my body tag, and I'm going to probably have some kind of external container that I want to use, that I want to be able to target. And sometimes I use, for me personally, I use a generic container for my outer container, like a wrapper, right? An example of this would be a div tag. A div tag, and I'll write it in shorthand, div tag with a class of container, right? That's kind of my outer container, my outer wrapper, if you will. Right? Think about that as a box being drawn around all my content. That's what I do, right? Okay, cool. Then I want to have something like this, some kind of header document, or part of my document, some kind of nav. Well, hold on, let's do it in shorthand. So here's my header with a nav inside, right? My nav has some kind of unordered list, right, with 5 list items. Right? Inside the list items is an anchor tag, and inside each anchor tag, square brackets, I have an href tag that includes a kind of a blank link, so it's not going to go anywhere right now. And also, I also want the text of my anchor tag, where it's going to go, my link text to look like this: link, a number, link number 1, number 2, and the $sign tells me it'll increase the numbers. It'll go from link 1, 2, 3, it'll count, right? So that's inside of my list item, right? Each of my list items. And if I press tab, I get this, right? Let me undo that so you can see that line, right? Again, I'm using Emmet here, so if you don't have Emmet activated in your brackets, this is what you want to do. All right, so I've just done up to this. And if you notice, there's a couple of new things. I put some square brackets here. Square brackets say I can affect an attribute. So I can specify an attribute for each of the list items and all the anchor tags in my list items have an attribute of an href tag, a link, hyperlink, with, it doesn't go anywhere right now. It just has a stand-in of a hashtag, which means don't go anywhere, right? Have a hyperlink, act like a hyperlink, but don't go anywhere, right? And here's my link number and then the actual number sign. So when I press tab, I get this structure, right? So here's my navigation, right? Let me go back. I want to also add in for my header, right? How about if I add in some other stuff, like for my aria? What do I put in there for my, what do I put in there for my aria? I can do it in two ways. I can do it first like this, and then go back in here and kind of do something like, you know, I could put a role in here. Remember we talked about accessibility, and one of my accessibilities might be a masthead, right? Or some kind of navigation or something like that. There's my navigation in my header, right? I could also put that navigation role in my nav, right? So I'll undo that. So here's my nav, which you might want to put the role in there. Role is equal to navigation, right? Going back to the stuff we talked about before, which is for ARIA, for screen readers, and for people who have assistive devices, this is the kind of stuff that helps. Okay, cool. So we've got my header, and you know what? I might as well put in a little bit of some comments, and comments look like this again, right? Where I say header section. Right, so I've got my comment in there for my header, and now I'm going to do the main body of my document, right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to use my comment again. So main section. And of course I'm going to put a main tag in there. And underneath my main tag, I may have some other tags as an example. But let's leave them simple like that. We'll keep it simple. We'll say inside of our main tag, we have an H1 tag with a heading of, you know, first heading. You can put whatever you want in there. And then next to the H1 tag, I also have a paragraph tag with a lorem text of 50, right? Okay. And if I press tab, I get this. Right? Some stuff you've already seen. This is all the stuff you've seen before, guys. One thing I may test you on the final exam or the midterm is some of this stuff. These, if I put this in there, this this piece of code, what does it turn out to be? What does it look like? This Emmet or Zencoding, if you're using Visual Studio, what does it produce, right? So first heading, right? And again, if I want to put in a role, if I go to role for my main, right? What kind of role should I put together here? From you know, what would you suggest? It's not a heading, right? Here's main, right? If you look at main as a role, I can use that for assistive devices and for my landing roles. Here they are, right? Okay, so that's my role, my main section, and now I'm going to go into my footer. Still all in the div tag, the outer container tag, right? Here's my footer. And by the way, I know I missed something. Okay. And in my, I called it header, of course. My fever brain. Here's my footer. And what I want to do is I want to put a role, right? If I look for a proper role for my footer, I look through here, right? As an example, content info seems to be the right one to put in. And with some kind of copyright information, I'll put the and copy tag, right? Which is looks like a copyright icon. And then I'll say copyright 2015, right? And you might also say like something like, you might also see something like all rights reserved. You know, one of those. Some kind of statement that says, you know, this page is copyrighted. We might put the name of the company down here and the contact information and so on as well. One thing I missed in my main is a section. Maybe what I want to do is I want to section this off because I may have more than one article. Or I might also make this an article, right? So I might do something like this. I missed an article. There's an article tag. That's kind of in my main section. So I'm going to kind of cut this one and put it at the bottom. That's something we can probably add in there for sure, right? And the article tag, you know, again, I can give it a class if I want to target it with CSS of, you know, first article or article, whatever I want, whatever I decide on from a CSS perspective. So all articles with the class of article have this kind of styling. All right, cool. Let's see what it looks like if I save this thing. And if I actually use the lightning bolt to see a preview, what does it look like? We've done this all before, right? I get my Ghostly pop up. It looks like this, right? A very simple page is what it looks like right now. So that's, in a nutshell, one thing. I missed a couple of other things too. What else did I miss? What would you have done differently on the HTML side there? I could have put something in here. Anybody? Language. So I could have put language is equal to English, right? To specify that my website is an English language website, right? It helps with that. See what it just did with Google, with Chrome here? If I go back, and if I click this again, one thing it did last time is said, is this, we don't know what language this is, should we translate it? And the reason why is because this lorem ipsum text looks like, some kind of Latin, right? It doesn't know what to do with it. So it says, well, it looks like it's in another language, right? But if I put the language is equal to English, it won't ask me that question, right? Any questions so far? This is review again. You've seen this about 10 times. I'm going to keep doing this. By the way, on the exam, any exam, you're going to have a practical piece you have to do in class, right? An in-class practical little thing, right? I might give you some code to springboard from, right? But I might ask you to put some stuff like this together. I might say, put together a basic structure for a website, right? Using any resources you have, right? Or whatever. Or I might give you a resource and say, from here, build this. I want you to add this, 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 these 5 pieces, or whatever it's going to be in the time you have. Okay. I also we're going to talk about forms today. So let's make a section in here. So we've got a header. We've got our main role, right, as an example. And let's suppose that we want to link to another page that almost looks identical to this one, but it's our contact page. And again, I kind of tested you today on your 5 pages. Most of you got that right. By the way, has everyone done their test? Anyone not done their test? You done your test? Okay. So I can talk about now the problems that I saw. Some of them were the ordering of this stuff. You guys were a little off when it comes to doc type, HTML, head, meta tag, head, body, and stuff like that. Some people came up with some silly mistakes like that, right? Also, I asked for elements, not tags. So I said, put in what the paragraph element is. And you put in, angle bracket, P, angle bracket. That's a tag. That's not the element. The element is what I'm naming, the name of the element, BR or P tag, P element, as an example. If I asked for a tag, I would have asked for both the beginning tag or the end tag, right? Those are the tags. So the tag, this is the thing to know for next time, and that's why we do these little tests, right? So we can keep on the same page from a terminology perspective, right? If I say the head tag, I mean this, right? If I say the head element, I mean this, all right? Those are the 2 different things. The head element has the head plus the properties plus all the children, right? The head element. The head element contains all of this. The head tag may only be this, okay? That's 2 different things. Okay, so let's get moving and grooving on that. Those are the 2 major ones that I saw today when I looked at the tests. And there were some other minor things that I saw as well, but more or less some silly mistakes. Some of you rushed. You're taking your time and taking a look at it. You have all the documentation. And for some of the questions, I went right by the books. If you actually have the book, if you actually went to the titles of each of the sections, you actually went in there and looked. Even the PowerPoint slides, they came right from the PowerPoint slides. I like verbatim, the same words. I just put a blank in there instead of the element that it was supposed to be. Okay, so main section, my footer. I want to kind of copy this page. Remember last time where we copied our index.html page and we made another page. But before we do that, I know that I'm going to name these pages correctly. So this is what I would do ahead of time now. I know that I'm going to have an index.html. So that's going to be my home page. So here's what I'm going to do, index.html, right? And this I'm going to make my home page ahead of time. It's going to be called home. And I know this is going to be products, services, and so on. I'm going to make my 5-page site, right? Products, services, as an example, about us, and contact us, right? You can make it some variation of these things, no problem. But you'll see a lot of this out there like that. So I know this is going to be called my products. I don't have this yet, but my products.html, right? I'm going to probably have a services.html. I might as well put them in there now, right? This is going to be my about.html. You can make it also about us, no spaces, or about underscore us. It's up to you. I like just calling it about. Contact.html, right? And so now you have your structure. And you know what? I also want to put some kind of a class on the list item that says this is going to be my active element. We don't have any kind of style for this yet, but we will further down the road. And I want you to see this over and over again to be familiar with the way we're doing things. All right, so that's part of it as well, right? Now I want to copy this page a bunch of times, and I'm going to eventually modify my index.html to say something else, right? Like a welcome or something. But I've got enough information where I can move on, and I can also change my HTML forms title to something else. So let's do that. So I'm going to say go in here, and I can actually I can do it here and copy it. I can show in Finder, or in your case, you show on your Windows folder. All right, so here's my Finder, and what I want to do here is I want to first of all, let's save this file. That would be good. And then going back, I want to copy and I want to paste a bunch of times. So 2, 3, 4, 5, and then rename them, right? So here's my first copy. I rename this to home. So this is products, just to match up with what my links are going to be. Services, lowercase s. Make sure it's correct. About and contact, right? Here we are. So we got all our pages, 5 pages. And now that I've got them, you notice they appear here in brackets. Again, all review. And what I want to do is I want to go into each of my pages and do some slight modifications. So you're seeing this a second time, right? Hint, hint. You may have to do this for yourself. Make a 5-page site, for example, for your next assignment or something like that. Who knows? Let's take a look and see what that looks like. So I'm going to go into my products page again, and I'm going to modify this title to products. Maybe add some changes to my active class. So move it from here and move it to my products. Right? So this is going to be active now. My products link will be active in on my links if I ever get to that styling role. Eventually I will, right? And here in my main, it's still going to be a class of article, but this is going to say our products. As an example, some lorem text is okay. And then let's close this one off. Let's go into services and do the same thing. So services. And then we'll go into our active link and change our active link for my, again, it makes no difference right now, but it will one day, soon, right? Our active link. And then in here, we're going to go into call this our services, just so we know there's a difference. Okay, very simple. And let's go into about, right? There's an about page. We'll call this about us. We'll change our active link from my list item on the top, again, to our about list item down here. There it is, about. And down here in our first, where it says first heading, as an example, we'll change this to about us. You can also say, sometimes you see our team or whatever as a second heading or whatever. And let's add that in there. Let's say we have just one more change to this thing. We'll add another article. So we'll take the article here like this. And I'll make a change to the about page to add a little bit more content. And this is our second article. And maybe we'll call this, if this is first, we'll call it, we have a class of first. And this is a class of second. Maybe we'll have different styling for that. We don't have any right now. We still may have a heading tab, but it won't be an H1. It'll probably be an H2, right? And what we may have in here is our team, right? Something about, you know, your team or whatever. And then what you may have is some kind of a bunch of images in here, right? We can add in, but in some kind of ordered list or unordered list. So where you have your team member, your name of the team member, and so on in a list. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'm going to put it in my paragraph tag. I'm going to say, you know, team information goes here, right? Because we're just kind of scaffolding right now, all right? About us, right? And our team, and some team information goes here, and maybe we'll make just a paragraph tag of some simple information about the person with some lorem text that's very brief, like 20 words, right? Something like that. All right, so some information there, save that. And then, again, you can put in some other stuff for yourself. And then I'm going to go in and, so that's let's do our contact page. And this is what we're going to work on today. We're going to work on a contact page because we're doing forms today, right? So we'll talk about this. This is the page we're going to work on the most. So we're going to go into our HTML forms and say, we'll call this Contact Us. Right, here's our Contact Us page. And one thing we want to do is move this active link from here to contact. Here's our contact page. And as we move through it, this will say Contact Us. One thing we want to probably have in our contact page is our address. So instead of a paragraph tag, let's take this out altogether and make it an address tag. And inside our address tag, we'll put in some information, right? So for example, we may have some kind of, I'll make this strong, the company name, right? And then, again, for now, we're going to use a break tag, right, or as an example, right? And our break tag is just going to shift us down one line. Underneath that, we're going to say our address information. So we're going to have 123 Company Road Lane, or Company Road, let's say, with a BR tag. And then it'll be in Company City, right? Company Province. BR tag. And then we're going to have a telephone number, right? Or we do something like this. Tel, right? And it's going to be, something like 705 555 5555, right? With the BR tag. And then finally, we're going to get into our fax. If you have a fax number, some people do still. 555 5556, because usually it's like one off of our regular number, right? Some kind of email. So our email, you can reach us at info, right? This is what it's going to say, but we have to frame this in an anchor tag of some sort, right? Info at, and the company name, companyname.com, right? With the BR tag. Now tell me, how do I make info at a companyname.com a link? All right, so I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm doing a lot of work for you, right? Anybody? How do I make this into a link? This info at companyname.com, and what kind of, how do I make it into a link? Yeah.
Mail to.
That's where it's going. Almost that's that. Instead of the HTTP, I put it a mail to, and what that mail to will do. We'll talk about email links later on. It actually kicks off if for some people where they've enabled a default mail system on their operating system, it'll kick off your mail client, to come up and send an email to these people, right? So let's surround this with an anchor tag. So what I do is I would do something like this, right? I would have an anchor tag in there, right, with some kind of href. Let's see if by the way, I probably want to do one of these just for now. Whenever I do some kind of emit and I want to make sure it works, I do it in a blank space. That's a good trait, a good thing to do. So an anchor tag, and inside the anchor tag, I want to have an attribute of an href element, right, with a again, the value of that would be this, right? Part of this plus the mail to, right? Now, is that enough, or should I put some forward slashes? Mail to. Anyone know? Keith? Is that enough, or should I put forward slashes in the two? Should I put this?
No. No, just that.
And that's the first thing. And then I'm going to put for my actual the information that's going to go in, my value. I'm going to take this. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to put that over here. as a format, and then tab. And when I do that, it gives me the proper anchor tag, how it's supposed to look. That's my anchor tag for my email, right? Now, typically, again, you could put that on the same line, and it'll wrap, or you can put it below. Remember, your browser won't really care if you do this. There won't be any difference, right? Because space will be ignored in the browser, right? So the BR tag, I'm going to put that next to it. There we go. And that's your email, right? Okay, so I got my email, maybe a website, huh? So I'm going to put www, and then again, there'll be another anchor tag like that to my website. I'm just going to copy this whole thing instead of having to type this all out at the very basics, and I'll have some kind of HTTP for my website, http://www.companyname.com, right? Which would be the same thing over here, right? www.companyname. And we haven't really talked about links too much, but know that when we go through it, the anchor tag, the A tag, if you will, has this href element again as a review, right? Which is the attribute, I'm sorry. And then the attribute has a value of where the page is going to go. There's one alternate that I can put in here. How about my target? Could I put that as an attribute? Sometimes we do, because you don't want them to open up their website and replace the one that they're looking at, which is this contact.html page, right? So we have another attribute we can add in there called target, right? And it gives you some options. So I could go to blank, I could go to the parent, I could go to self, or I could go to top. And my recommendation is something like a blank, right? So it'll go to new blank page or new blank tab. All right, so that's my www with the BR. So I've got my address, right? That's the one thing I need. So I'm going to kind of save that. I think I've got almost everything I need except for my form, right? But let's make some space for my form, right? And I'm going to put that in there down here. When we talk about forms today, that's what it's all about, right? So we're going to have I want to surround my form with a generic tag, right, or some kind of section. And I like to do that. So here's my section I'm going to use in there. That's a good way of doing it. And my section, I might give it a class, as an example of form section, right? Because I want to maybe go in there later on and style this whole section to look a little bit different than everything else, right? And I might have to also put in some comments that kind of say form section, right? Just so that I can indicate to what this is. Here's my main section, here's my form section, and this is all inside my main. One thing I didn't put is I didn't put a comment on my footer, which I probably should have done in each one. But I won't do that in every one. I just forgot. So I'm speeding through this today. Okay, so cool. I've saved everything. Let's just see how this looks, this form. If I was going to go to my site, and if you notice, this is my company information, my www, my info@companyname.com, my telephone number, and everything else. It's all styled very simply. If you notice, I got a bit of a problem here, right? I got my copyright statement in here, and it's butting against my name, right? Sometimes what we do with this one is, like I said, we add an additional space to give me some, and we can do that. By the way, I'm using BRs, but typically what we want to try and do is use CSS to control our spacing, right, in our alignment. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will. So for now, what we can do is just to give us a little bit of extra space, I can add an additional BR after the my company name. And when I do that, and I do kind of an update, see what it looks like, and I go back to Chrome, now it shows me a bit of a space between my address and my copyright statement. So BR is a line break. That's what it does. So it kind of pops it down a little bit. Okay, cool. So any questions as to what we've done so far? So I've created that 5-page site we've seen before, right? And now, because the pages are all there, I can always flip to them, to any one of them. Like I can go to products, and it'll bring up our products. It says Italian, no. Services, about us, right? And contact us, or go to my home page, right? Where I would probably put something like, first heading, second heading, and whatever, right? My landing page. So I've got those links all working, and I did that by copying my index.html, and especially my navigation scheme, this navigation scheme, I copied it from one page to the other so that way I have a consistent navigation scheme across all my pages. Right now it's unstyled navigation, but still it works, right? If I actually go from one page to the other. It's just a list, a navigation list, if you will. Questions up to this point? Because now we're gonna get to the next piece. So the next piece is I have my GitHub desktop client as an example, right? And the good thing about this one is it's still here, right? I'm looking at my changes. And if you look up here, look what it says here: 6 uncommitted changes I've made, right? So I click on this, and I can see I've added all of these pages into my site. I'm doing everything by my tool here, not command line, right? And so I want to add in something like this. Here's my initial project commit, right? And I want to kind of commit and sync to master. When I do this, commit and sync to master, it's synced up locally, right? I'm syncing locally, but I haven't synced up remotely. If I go back up to the remote site here, right, and if I refresh, I still see, oh, it did. It actually put it up. I pushed it up too. That's good. It pushed everything up to the master, which is good. So you see all my pages now. So if you weren't able to follow along, you can certainly go to, and why did it put it there? It put it in the wrong spot, but you can certainly go to my last name instead of Georgian College, COMP1002, lesson 4, and then you'll see this information. And I've got 2 commits. The first one that happened when I created my README file, and the second one, which was my initial project commit that I made when I launched this project. All right, so you have it up online. Questions so far? Right? So if you want to catch up, you can certainly go up on GitHub and grab my code files, right? So you don't have to wait, especially if you weren't able to follow along fast enough, because I was going lightning today. I could go faster, but then I'd probably lose you. I may lose you. Some people may be able to keep up, and I hope you can. Okay, so next phase. So I want to talk about forms, right? That's what we're really talking about here. And with forms, we have our, there's a couple things we want to talk about. One piece is actually creating the form elements, which we're going to do in a second. It's going to take a snap to create the form elements, right? That's one piece. And the second piece we want to talk about is some simple ways of validating forms with our new HTML5 without using JavaScript, right? Because a lot of times nowadays we use JavaScript for more complex validation, right? You have some code to check to see that the user enters in the proper information and won't allow you to continue if the user doesn't enter something or if they enter something wrong, right? So that's what validation is all about. So again, we have a collection of controls and labels and buttons that make up our form, right? That's what it is. And think about a form. If you see there's actually a really cool book example that I have. I'll pull up one that's already done. Let's take a look. And it looks like this. So these are a form, right? These are typical forms that we'd see. My account, last name, email, password, re-enter password, my address. If you want to enter an address, these are different forms. If you notice, these are all active with a state, Alaska or California, Alabama or California, right? And some kind of picture. If I want to upload something, I can choose a file from my local system. This all works with just HTML, with no JavaScript involved, but with a little bit of styling. So there's actually a style sheet to make this thing blue and to look nice. All right, that's involved. Now what we're doing is we're making an unstyled sheet because we haven't talked about styling yet, right? But this stuff is what it would look like from for some forms you normally would see. And you have some buttons like create an account, and so on. And it tells me some validation. This is the validation you get, HTML5 validation. For browsers that support it, unfortunately IE doesn't support this kind of stuff, right? Even Edge I don't think will. For browsers that are supported, if I don't enter my first name, it might be a required field. I can't proceed until I do something like this, right? So I can type my last name. Today I'm not in the way to do it. And let's say if I want to do that and go create account, right? it'll try and teleport me to the form process. I have to process my form, and it's kind of going to this phantom showform.php, which doesn't exist, right? Because you can't process your form, right, with an HTML page. I'm going to send my data, my form data, somewhere. It's not handled on the client side. Form data is handled on the server side. We're not talking about server-side technologies in this course, right? So, example, PHP might be one server-side technology, and the reason why this is giving me a web page not found is because I don't have a PHP site, number one, or PHP page, one, and second, the only way I could have a PHP page that would work would be if I had a running PHP server locally on my system, right? Because PHP requires a running server, right? So that's why I'm not getting any kind of this weird response. It's not because the page has an error. So when we process our form, when we click submit or create account or log in or whatever it's going to be, our form data is sent to the server, and the server processes it on the back end and then returns information back to the user on the front end. It does this round trip. Starts with the client view that you see, goes to the back end server. It does some magic. You know, you don't the user doesn't know what's going on. It does some magic under the hood, right, in the back end, and then spits out some information back on the front end again. Okay, so that's the kind of picture I want to give you. Okay. Now there are several different input elements and so on, and there's some improvements that they've put into HTML5, some things that they've added. Like before, there was never an email input or a search input or a telephone input or a URL type input, or any one of these in forms. It was never like this. And what this has done is it's given small screens like our smartphones and so on the ability to give different keyboards. When I put an input type email, that's going to give me my email keyboard on my smartphone. If you have an Android phone or iOS phone, there's different keyboards when you type an email or when you ask to type an email. Not just a standard keyboard, right? So this input type switches our keyboard type, which makes it more convenient for the user to fill out a form. That's what it does, right? Never used to exist before HTML5. So now this is kind of new. Or we can kind of put new in quotation marks, floating quotes, right? Kind of new because HTML5 has been around for a bit now. But, and so on. There's new things like data lists and other things. So I've kind of put them here as a reference card. And this is coming right out of your book, but you can always use the PowerPoints or the PDFs as a reference card for some of the same information. Some of this isn't supported across all browsers, just like I talked about last week when we talked about our data time elements that we talked about. They're not supported across all browsers. So we have to kind of look and see if they're supported. And you notice that there's a link that says learn more at wufoo.com HTML5. Let's go there for a second. So if I go to, if I look at forms, and I go to, I don't think I put that in there. So wufoo.com, right, HTML5, I think that's what it is. The current state of HTML5 forms. If you go there, you can see that what is supported and what's not, depending on what element we're talking about, the email element, telephone element, and so on, across different browsers and platforms. And like I said to you before, if you're curious, you can always go to caniuse.com, which is also another one that I like. Again, you can look at different elements here and search to see if that element, your email, telephone, and URL input types, you can see how it's supported across everything except for this Opera Mini. I like this one a little bit more. It gives us an overview of how much support those kind of elements have cross-platform. So that's this one. Let's go back. And I'll just kill this one. There we go. So different input types are available, again, through HTML5, but not always supported across browser and platform. And there's also a few additional attributes that are kind of standalone. You're going to see this across all the different elements we're going to use. An example of this would be, and a very common one, is the required attribute. When you put the required attribute on its own into a form element, we're going to talk about this, right? It makes it so that little pop-up that you just saw when I didn't enter my name properly will come up and say, you can't continue, please fill out this form. please enter your name kind of thing, right? So that's what comes up. You can also customize these attributes and so on by using JavaScript. You can customize the output. But for now, they have a standard format for supported browsers. Not all browsers support these attributes, again. They're only supported across the most common ones. All right. So again, every form element has a start and end tag just like normal, so it would be called form. We're going to see that in a second. So if I go back to my brackets and I want to enter a form, let's just start doing this, guys, right? So I'm going to enter a form element here. Here's my form. I'm going to start typing. And if you notice, it also has an action, right? So form, and it has an action. The action, right? It tells us where it's going. Where is my form going to teleport to afterwards? I'm going to take all my data that I'm going to collect from my form, right? And I'm going to send it to some kind of processing location, right? So when I say form action is equal to in quotations, by the way, I just typed form and then tab, and then brackets kind of did it for me, right? When I click this form, it gives me this action. An action set, this will be the HTML or the link to where it's going to go, right? For now, let's put in pound because it's not going anywhere right now. It's kind of, there's no location for the form. How about, so we got our action attribute. We also have our method attribute. And there's two values, get or post, that we're going to talk about. Who knows what, who's ever done forms before? Anybody? You might have already done that in your travails, right? Kayla?
Really long time ago.
I'm pointing at you because I know you know how to do some of this stuff, right? So when you do it, method, post, or get, what's the difference between post and get? Do you remember? Anybody? I'll show you. So here's the typical form, what it looks like, right? When you have a method and an action. Look at my method. My method is going to show either post or get, and an action is going to be where the form is going to be processed. What's the web page that's going to process the form on the back end, on the server? Remember that PHP or ASP or even something like a JavaScript backend with Node.js can do the back-end processing now for the data that you're going to send to your form, right? You're going to send your data, the form from your data, or the data from your form, sorry, across to another web page. And the web page itself, through the back-end server, it's being controlled by the back-end server, is going to process the data and spit back some kind of response and or take that data and enter it somewhere like in a database, right? Or store it somewhere local, like on a file, right? It's got to do something with the data that you're sending it, most often in a database. All right, so that's kind of what the way a form looks like. At a very high level, you've got a bunch of things that we already see. For example, a generic div tag, a paragraph tag, and some other things you haven't seen, like a label and an input tag. Right? We'll talk about that in a sec. So let's put those in. So we need a method, and I'm going to go back in here. Just make a space in here. And our method for this one, just as a default, we'll use get. Right? That's one piece of the form, right? The other thing is that we have a couple of things we can put in as well, right? We also can create a form ID, which is something maybe want to target the form. It's a unique form. So maybe my form is going to have an ID of, first form, right? Might have an ID of that. That's my first form. I could also have a class, right, of forms, the forms class, right? All my forms get kind of treated the same way. That was another question on your test. Could you have both a unique ID and a class? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can, right? ID you can use to target as a unique ID or to use from a data perspective like we're going to see here. We don't try not to use a unique ID for styling, but it can be used for that. And then we have a class, right, which is also used for styling. We can combine our ID and multiple classes to style our form in a very specific way. So you can have more than just an ID or a class. You can have both an ID and a class. They're not mutually exclusive. All right, so that's cool. We've got that kind of stuff going on. So my ID is first form. And now what I have is a couple of elements. I usually have, let's say the first element that we want to talk about is some kind of label, right? Like for example, please enter your name, right, kind of thing, right? Please enter your name. So this is a label we put in, label, right? And the label text would be like something like this: please enter your name, right? That could be what we put in there. Or we could have it as simple as first name, right? First name. Then you might see that as well, like first name, last name. Okay, cool. If it's first name, last name, I also may have an input, right? And if I just type input like this and put tab, it'll give me a type, right? My default input is text. Now there are different types of input. I can have a text input. I can have a URL input. I can have a different kind of input. So I can be asking for a website or an email. So let's try this out. If in brackets, it may be intelligent enough to add in some example of inputs. And if you notice, some code hinting comes up that tells me I can put in a checkbox. I can put in a color, a date time, an email, a file, all kinds of other of types. And if you notice, it covers a wide range of controls. So think about each of these emails is a control that's going to appear styled in a very unstyled way, based on the browser styles, right, on my page, okay? So I'm going to have an email or something. So the first thing I want is some kind of text, and my text is going to be what I'm going to put in there. It's going to be my name. So text was correct, actually. So let's put text. So my text keyboard, my keyboard that has all the alphabet, is going to come up. So I can type in my name. It's not a number that's going to come up. Okay, that's the first thing. And then in my input, I also might have other things. If I go space, it gives me some other examples of what goes in here as an example for some input. Now you might see some other code hinting that you don't have because I have some other things built in here. But there's also other things you can put in here. Like for example, an ID. You can put an input ID, right? So I can put this ID is equal to first name. I could put that in there, right? Let's leave it at that for now. We'll go back to it. And then after this tag, this is the initial tag here. I want to put in my closing tag, right? So here's my closing input tag. And if you notice, it doesn't allow me to do that. It says, hold on, right? There's no, we have the, we would normally try and put this in there, but you can tell, even if you forget, it tells you that you don't need this backend tag, because some tags are complete unto themselves. There is no first tag and last tag, right? Well, now that we have a label or an ID as first name, we can target our label from a screen reader perspective. It helps us to put a for in there, for, and the name of our ID, our input ID, right, which would be first name, right? So this label is for my input ID, my input, my text, right? I can also put a placeholder, right, where I can say enter your name, right, which will come up inside as a default. And also I can put in another option, another attribute called required, like I mentioned. Here's required. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Here we go. All right, I'm going to save that. Sometimes also, if you go back to our PowerPoint presentation, you see what we've done here. We've got our label for, and here's first name. Our type is text. Our ID is first name. We also have a name, and we'll talk about what this name is. And also a class that we can assign to it so we can style it, right? So our name typically is the same as our ID. So let's go back and do that. So the name, and I'm going to keep adding. So this might span two lines here for us right now. All right. So don't worry about it. The browser doesn't care, right? So our name is typically the same as our ID, first name. And sometimes we put a class, right, of a form group or something like that. So it's a form group. Or, form control. It would be a form control. That'd be more appropriate. I mean, this class doesn't do anything again because we have no styling, but that's what we would do, let's say. Okay, so now, and if you notice, if we go back, one thing we're missing is something called a field set. Here's our field set. And our field set encompasses this whole thing for first name and last name. And there's also some other stuff they put in where they separate the two items by paragraph tags. Now, again, I'll tell you right now, you can see this, the paragraph tags here, but I don't recommend. I don't recommend because paragraph tag adds in what? Some spacing between the two fields. You want to control this with CSS in the future with style sheets as opposed to tags. Remember, our paragraph tags are supposed to have some kind of content, and yes, our input and our label are content, but really from a contextual perspective, it's wrong. So I don't recommend. Okay, let's get back to this. So what does it look like? What we got going on here? Well, I'm gonna save this thing. I'm gonna go back out to the page, and down here, if you notice, I got my first name, and it says enter your name. I don't know if you can see that, right? Now there's no styling involved, but if you notice, enter your name is the placeholder text we put in there, right? That's our placeholder text, and I can put something like, Tom. Now enter my name isn't correct, is it? If I go back to this, it's enter your first name, or I can put in there first name, like inside the placeholder text. I'm gonna go down here and change my placeholder tag to enter your first name. It's required. Let's copy this for a second, right? Copy these two labels, and I'm going to put them in here like this, right? So there's another label, another control that I'm adding in there. Now I'm adding spaces in here, but on the actual web page, unstyled, there will be no space, right? I'm going to add in a last name, right? So here's my first name, my last name, as an example. And of course, I'm going to have to change the for and the ID. So my ID would be last name then, right? And because of that, my label points to the last name input, not my first name, which would be over here. That doesn't make any sense, right? And my name would also be last name. I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And also, from a placeholder perspective, enter your last name should be there, and it probably should be required because otherwise, I don't have to enter my last name. Well, my first name's okay. Still a form control though. See? Both are tagged with a class of form control because I would probably style them the same way. Both my first name and my last name should have probably the same class, right? Okay, cool. Let's go back. So I've got now this. Take a look. Here's my first name, and if I tab in, here's my last name, right, as an example. And it's all in a row because, again, we don't have any styling. What they've done in the book, right, if I add in a paragraph tag like this, and sometimes they do that with a class of row, if I do this, that's why I'm telling you that they're using the paragraph tag, right, I'll do the same thing, to separate each of these items. So I'm going to say do the same thing. So here's my paragraph tag with a class of row. I would rather, instead of a paragraph tag, this is what they've got here, use a generic tag, right? Like a div tag. That makes more sense to me. I want to separate this stuff out. I want to use a div tag, right, to separate this out as opposed to a paragraph tag, which makes no semantic sense. If it's not going to make semantic sense, I might as well use some kind of generic container tag, which is a div tag, right? That makes sense to me. And I might ask to put some other kind of class in there as well, as an example, like, if I was going to go into it, like, for example, not just a row, so each one is a row, but also some kind of form group, right? Maybe that these are form groups because the label and the input, right? The text box, basically, that's what they are, a label and a text box, are going to be part of the same form group. They're going to be grouped together, right? Now, I don't have any kind of styling again, but that's what we do. Let me take a look at the page now, right? So we'll go back to the page. And you can see now with our div tags, right, they've separated one on top of the other. Okay? So first name and last name. Let's continue. So first name, last name, as an example, maybe email, right? And remember, email, I'm going to copy this whole group again. Let's do this whole thing now. add to it, our email is going to be slightly different. It's still going to be of class of row and form group on our div tag, our container tag. In our label, it's not going to be last name. It's going to be called email, right? And our text type is going to be email. Our last name, our ID is going to be probably email, right? Our name is going to be email. And our placeholder is probably going to be like enter your email address or email address. Enter, how about enter your email? And here, and by the way, you can also put in some kind of required pattern, right? Which we'll talk about later. Email at companyname.com, whatever it's going to be, right? To give the idea of what you're looking for here, right? And here, of course, your label should be different too. It should just say email. And then the final one, right? The final input, we'll make it on its own, and we'll go do the same thing. We'll say div with a class of row and form group. We'll put an input with a type of if I put submit, my type is submit. ID is submit button, right? Name is submit button. And I don't need to make it required, right? So I don't care about if someone presses it or not. Actually, it won't matter, right? Class is still a form control. Class is actually a button, right? It'll be a button class, right? So I want to style it as my own type of button, right? Okay. So again, I'm using the class as just a descriptive name for something that I want to eventually style. It doesn't mean anything. You can choose whatever name you like. I'm using my names at the top of my head, right? And when we come to styling, you'll decide your classes that you're going to use. All right, let's try this out now. Let's go to the web page and see what it looks like, right? So now I have a button. Here's my button. It's a submit button, right? Now if I click submit, I have some form validation that says, hey, enter this field, right? It's built in. Like I didn't do anything. It just tells me to do it, right? So I can put in my first name, my last name. If I forget my email address, I'm going to click submit. It's going to say, hey, enter this field, right? So I can put that in as well, right? So tom@companyname.com, right? And if I click submit now with my get, it's going to try and take me to a page, right? And if you notice what it does, it takes all my information, take a look at this, and sends everything I put in on the header of my page. So why is this bad? Right? Take a look at this. Right? I got my contact with a question mark, and then I got my first name Tom, my last name Theopoulos, and my email tom@companyname.com, and my submit button submit. I sent all this at the top of my page. That's what happens when I use a get. So is a get really a good thing to do from a secure perspective? Security says no, right? You should use a post. A post, though, if I do this, will fail, and I'll show you what it does. So let's go into a post instead of get. Go back to here. And inside my form, on the top of my form where it says method, instead of get, I'm going to use post. By the way, there's two other methods that you can use now in modern browsers, which is put and delete. We'll talk about another day, right? But let's just try this. So I click this now, and I go back out there in my form example, and I try and enter my information again. So John Smith. So jsmith@companyname.com, and then click submit, right? It'll take me there and it says cannot post contact.html, right? It's trying to, but it's not no place to go. But here's a good example of this, right? My contact.html, that's all it's showing. It's not showing all my data, yeah? So my data is being preserved. It's going to be sent without it being shown on the top of my page. because sometimes we don't want to do that. So different methods when we use our action, which to go to a specific site. An example of this, I'm going to go back to this page, and before we submit, I'm going to make a change. At the top of my action, I'm going to put in some kind of email process, or process form. Let's call it process form, right? .php. I don't have a form like that. Even if I did, it wouldn't do anything, right? So I'm going to go to processform.php, right? I'm going to take out the number sign here for a second. So an actual link, right? And if I go back to the page, and I'll launch it again, and I put in John Smith and blah, 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 and I press submit, right? It's going to try and go to processform.php, but doesn't exist processform.php. There is no processform.php, so it's not going to go anywhere, right now. And if it did, it would give me a response. Maybe the process form itself, that PHP form on the back end on the server, might give me a message to the user saying, thank you very much for your submission, Mr. User, and now get back to what you were doing. And it might redirect me somewhere else after a bit, to my home page or someplace else. That's typical. But all the back end processing happens on the server, not on the front end. So we make a nice, beautiful forms in the front end with CSS, JavaScript, and HTML, right? And then we process everything on the back end. So I want you to take that one away if you want to think about that, because that's going to be something that we're going to talk about on your test. We don't do the processing on the front end typically. Some newer frameworks can do different things on the front end. Like for example, AngularJS is a front end framework that we can use to do additional work on the front end that a lot of times traditionally was seen on the back end, like more additional form validation, and even things like connecting with the back end process. So a lot of the front end work that sometimes is done by the back end can be done with Angular or some other framework like React. There's other ones out there, Backbone.js and Knockout.js, JavaScript frameworks that can act almost like a back end, but not quite. They still need some kind of back end like a Node.js or an ASP.NET or something on the back end that produces their link to the database. Okay, so that's what your form would look like in a nutshell. You see the structure that we're describing is your form element is all of this, and includes the attributes, right, of the form tag itself, plus all of the different children that are nested inside of your form tag. So your form tag, right, is the two tags is your container. Think about this as a big box that your form lives. You can't put, well, you could put, if I put these label and input controls outside of my form, right, they will not respond in the same way as they would if they were inside my form element. And sometimes people use these labels and controls for other reasons. But it's not semantically correct, and it won't respond properly. Now, certainly you can use them without a form by using JavaScript, and JavaScript can target any element on the page and make it interactive, right? But the right way to do it first is to create semantically nice HTML, right? Where it's nicely formatted that you can use JavaScript and CSS to target. Okay, let's get back to the PowerPoint. So we handle a bunch of stuff here. We'll talk about field set in a second and what that does. Okay, let's go back to this. And by the way, maybe what I want to put in my form is just some kind of H2 tag that says, please register or something, right? So let's try this out. So we probably want to put some kind of H2 tag up here, which is registration, or we'll call it user registration. We're going to add to this little user registration form in a second, all right? So again, it could be a user registration form, a contact form. We can make all kinds of stuff where we just don't register. For example, if I wanted to make this into a contact form, I would need, let's make this contact form, right? I would actually call this, instead of my first form, my contact form. And I would still have my first name, my last name, and my email, because you want to get back to the person. But maybe it would also have a telephone number, yeah? So maybe I would want a telephone number for the contact information. I'm going to copy this and add it in here. So there's my, instead of my email, I would make a telephone number, right? So a telephone number that I want, that's the phone, we'll call this phone, sorry. And my type is tel, because tel as a form type is going to bring you up the telephone number keyboard on your smartphone or tablet, right? So tel. And then instead of my ID's email, it'd be phone. Name is phone. Still a form control, right? And what I'm going to enter for my placeholder is enter your phone number, right? Enter your phone number. And I might give them, or some kind of pattern, like for example, you know, let's do this again. So XXX, like a pattern like this. And then XXX, number, or XXX dash XXXX. Some kind of number pattern that you want to show them that this is the way you want to put in this information, right? That's what you're looking for. And then maybe something like a descriptive label that says phone or tel, whatever you want to put in there. Let's put phone. And then, one more, some kind of text area, right, that you can add in a message. So maybe we're going to call this label a message, and we're going to we'll say something like your message that you're going to send off. And instead of tel type, we're going to say text area. Let's try this out and see if I can get code hinting on this one. So I'm going to say, so if I say text, right? But there's also text area. We'll talk about this in a second, how this works, if this is correct or not. And ID is message, and the phone is message, and our class is still a form control, but our placeholder text is enter your message here. Enter your message here. And maybe what also you want to do is how many rows and columns, which we're going to talk about after. I'm going to go back to our text control in a second. One more time. One more thing. Our submit button shouldn't say submit, right? Our type is submit button. Our name shouldn't be submit button. Our value, by one thing we're missing is our value, which we didn't put in, value. Oops, not val. Value, right? Which could be send, right? And let's see what this thing does if we actually did everything correctly. So I'm going to go back to the page. And if everything's done correctly, if I didn't mess up, right? I've got my send button, and I've got this form. It looks still like a message. It doesn't look like a text area. We're going to go back in there and change that. I want to make a text area, right? That kind of input, right? And how do I do that? So here's my contact information, and here's my contact form if you want to send your information. If I click send, it's going to give me that it's required. All this stuff is required now. Email, phone, your message, all that stuff is required, right? And you may choose to make not all of it required. You might say, well, you know what, I don't care if he gives me an email or a phone, but I need one of them. For that kind of validation, you need to use JavaScript. One or the other is required, but either one is fine. All right, cool. Let me go back. All right, so cool, we got this. We got our form as an example. And you know what, just to make it so that we always have some separation, in my footer, I'm going to add in a horizontal rule. Not because we normally would use this kind of thing, an HR tag. And if I go HR, right, and I see what that does, if I go back to my page, right, it adds in a bit of a space, right, and a line that you can't see right now. Right, so if I was to refresh the page, there's that line, there it is. So it puts a horizontal line. It's actually not good form to do this, but we don't have any other styles right now. And when we get to styling, we'll take out the horizontal rule and use some kind of border or something else we can use in our style. And let's use the horizontal rule to separate some of these concerns here. So I'll separate the top of my page under my contact us, or down here where my contact form is. So it'll kind of separate this out, just from a visual representation perspective. So I'm going to go back. And before my form itself, but underneath my article, my first article, which is my address, right? I'm going to put in another in the middle here, a non-semantic HR tag. Doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning to this. It's just a line, right? A horizontal rule, a line, right? But I highly don't recommend. All right? It's just for us for separation purposes. And if I notice there's another line that goes here to separate our form out. Whew! Right? Lots of work to get a form going. Right? Lots more work than we had with the other stuff. Yeah.
So would this all go into contact, or we just did it under contact?
No, this would all go into contact. You probably have your coordinates here, how you contact me, and then some kind of form, right, to show maybe they want to contact you, sending you a message directly, right? And oftentimes we avoid putting an email address in there. Why? I don't put my email address in there at all. Who knows why? Yeah, because once they have my email address, they can spam me. Like bots can come through and spam the crap out of me, right? And then I would get my info at mycompany.com would be completely full with spam, right? So typically we don't expose our email address. That's not what we do on a regular basis. Let's go and take that out. So I'm going to go back to my address, and where it says email, I showed you how to do it, but that doesn't mean that you should do it anymore. Right? There it is. Make sense? All right, let's go back to our PowerPoint. So we talked about our form method just to talk about this, right? We have some kind of script URL, and I've used PHP as a backend as an example. But there are other kinds of backends you can target. And the script URL is actually the area that's going to, the link of what is your back form processing going to look like. Where is your back form processor going to be located? That's the thing that's going to handle your form itself. Okay. We've talked about post and get. And if you're, like it says here, if you're saving, adding, and deleting data in a database, post is the correct choice because you don't save any information, right? If you want to, they use get. Most search engines use get because you want to, if it's a search, if you're doing a search type form as opposed to some kind of registration form or login form, get is okay because you can save your search. And that's okay to have that information at the top of your page. So there's different kinds of forms, right? A form for searching, a form for submitting registration or login information, right? So different reasons to use those things. We talked about that. Form validation is kind of interesting. There's actually a really cool way of doing it. You can do it on the back end, so server-side validation can do everything for you. There's also client-side validation, so JavaScript can do it, like we talked about, or jQuery. That's a very popular way of validation, using jQuery, a JavaScript library, to validate your forms, right? You can also pull down some patterning you can use, right? We can actually use some patterning here in HTML5 to do some validation ahead of time. Like for example, if we want a certain pattern for a phone number, we can use something called regular expressions, right? A regular expression, a pattern that we can make sure that the user enters a certain information in our form, like a character pattern, or else we won't accept his entry, right? Let's just get back to this. So a field set element here, right? If you go back to this, there's a field set element. And it kind of groups forms together, form elements together. Like for example, a label and an input. That's a very good example of an input and a label being grouped together, right? That's not a bad idea, not a bad use of a field set, right? And also, when you go back, a legend element, right, kind of gives the field set a caption. Like for example, like it has here, address would be the field set surrounding your address information if you enter your address, and legend, the legend would be address, all right, if you were going to enter that in. And here's an example of that, right? So you have your field set, right, and then your legend underneath it. And that's on top of or surrounding your actual input. So I might want to put an input that says registration. That would be my legend, and my field set would have a class of registration, let's say, for a specific registration type form, right? Let's do that. So the whole thing, if I go back to my form, could have a field set, even in where my contact form, instead of me putting my H2 tag as contact form, I could use that as a legend. So let's change this to legend. So legend. Here's my legend. Much more sense, right? And then inside, it would be inside my field set. So I'll say field set. And we're going to just take this closing tag and put it way at the bottom of my form, right? Underneath my input, because this whole thing is really a registration type form, right? Now look what it says. It tells me that there's an issue, right? Oh, I put it in the wrong place, that's why. I meant, so I've got my div tags, here's my div tag, div tag, div tag, div tag, right? And here's my form tag, and we're missing something, aren't we? Let me see if I am. Section, nope, I'm good. It's listening for this thing. It's saying there's a problem, and if I hover over this, it's going to tell me there's a problem with I am missing a field set. So I'm going to do this to one of those. The closing field set tag. So here's my field set. Remember, I can put a class of registration. Right. So maybe I want to further put more style on my form to make my registration form look different than my login form, as an example. Right? So if I have a legend element inside of a field set that has a class of registration, hear what I'm saying? Listen to what I'm saying. Here's my English words to how I use my styling. If I have a legend, right, that's inside of a field set that has a class of registration, I want to color it blue. That would be the way I would speak in English terms about how I would use my CSS, my cascading style sheets, to target that particular element, right? And there's a way of putting that down in a format that the CSS would understand. All right. Let's save that and go back out and see what it looks like now. Does it change anything? You see, it probably won't change much. All right, look what it does. Here's my contact form now, right? My contact form is not my contact form. I called it registration. Let's fix that. I meant contact form. That'll be okay. Contact, and this would be of type contact, right? That's my field set. On my mind, I'm thinking registration still. So if I go back, right, so to this, you can see that my contact form is almost in a group box. That's what it's like. So if you're taking rapid application development with Miss Andrew, I'm not sure if you guys are doing it this semester, which is COMP1004, right? You doing that yet? That you're going to learn C#, and you're going to learn about something called form groups, or a group box. And a group box is what this is. It puts a box around your form elements to kind of group them all together to make them look like it's a form, right? That's what the field set does in Chrome. Now your browser, if you're using IE or if you're using Firefox, it might look slightly different, especially for IE. Okay. Any questions around this so far? So again, all we're doing is we're styling the form elements and putting them together so that you're able to have your user enter the information that they want to do, and then when they click send, they send this information off to the form processing piece on the back end that takes care of all that. I know I'm repeating myself, but there's a reason. All right, so that's this. So we did this legend piece, and also helps screen readers. Text boxes we talked about, which is what we did first with our first name, last name. And the name attribute is used by the server-side scripts to pass information. When I put name is equal to whatever my text box is called. First name, as an example. If I want to separate my form elements, sometimes we have some kind of class of row, right, as a styling hook. And sometimes we can put that on a div tag, like I recommend, or a paragraph tag or other tags. I don't recommend a paragraph tag because semantically, in my mind, it's semantically incorrect. It's meaningless for you to make it a paragraph. It's not a paragraph, right? Again, there's some talk around that. It talks here to create a text box. We talked about this already with a value, if you want to put a value as a specific thing, and some kind of placeholder, which we used placeholder with some hint text, which is what we did, like enter your name. This never existed before, this placeholder, and it's really super useful, especially if you don't have any space on your smartphone. So from a mobile design perspective, if I was designing for smartphone, I may not put a label at all anymore, right? I may just put my input elements with some kind of placeholder text in here because I don't have any space. So I might have my input box, my text box, and inside my text box I have enter your name, right? And that might be good enough as long as I've styled it correctly. So I don't have that extra label I can put my label inside my text box to give the user a hint of what to put in from a design perspective. Again, required is something we can put in. And also, autofocus, if we want to give an element focus when the page loads, like for example, which element you recommend, which of these controls do you think should have focus when the page loads? Anybody? I want to give one of these elements, one of these groups, focus when the page loads. I want it to go right there, so I don't have to click there. My user doesn't have to click there. Which one should it be? You guys are, I've already killed you guys, right? I can see that you guys are glazing. So I'm so sorry, right? Well, it'll be the first element, right? The first element, that my first name should have focus. My cursor should be flashing inside there right away, right? So I can add that in as an additional attribute under beside required. I can put autofocus. And what this does, when I run my page again, if I was to refresh, you notice that right now my first name is flashing when I refreshed. So it gives focus to that element, right? Now that's an event. We haven't talked about event handling. Whenever I give focus to an element, I automatically generate an event, a trigger. Something's happening right now. My browser, with its natural styling, handles the trigger, right, by coloring it blue. That is a browser-based style thing that works here in Chrome, right? When I reset my styles, we talked about reset styles last week, right? What it'll do is it won't reset, it won't color it anything, and there won't be any feedback because I'm resetting all my styles, right? For now, I just want to use this so you can see what it looks like. A couple more things as we run through it, right? Talk about text attributes. I want to get into that patterning. Labeling form parts, we talked about that with the for being for the label. And then password. Password's interesting too, because what it does is if you use a password, it enters asterisks as opposed to asterisks, or bullets, as an example. Instead of putting your password, it hides your password just by putting in type is equal to password, right? So it hides that information. Now that's really good, but for mobile, that may be bad. And there's been some talk about how maybe you don't want to hide your password when you enter a form in mobile. What would that be? Yeah.
I don't know mobile with passwords. Don't usually now every other word is it's visibly.
That's the way, depending on the phone, it does that, right? But however, there's some talk of, well, hold on, if I'm moving around, so I'm walking, like I'm putting my password, I'm walking, who's going to look over my shoulder? Who? Right? It's hard. So it's okay for you to have a little box, a checkbox somewhere to say, show password. Because it's easier for me to see what I'm doing at the user option, and then uncheck it if you don't want anyone to see what you're doing, right? So when you're entering form data, it makes it easier for the user to enter data. In fact, if anything that makes it easier for the user, we should do it on mobile. So that's what password does. Telephone we handle with, it brings up your telephone key. That's what I wanted to get to. One thing I want to get to is patterning, because we've covered most of this stuff. Search boxes, this is the problem with search boxes. Depending on the support that you get from a browser, it may look different. If I make a search box, so type is equal to search, right? So if I go, if I put this role is search as an example for my type of form, and if I say input type is equal to search, I'm going to get this type of search box in supporting browsers, right? Where I have a search box and I have a input type of find it, another button, and when I enter my search, it actually sends the search, whatever it is, to my process form on the back end that handles my search information. Maybe it connects to the database and gets that information and spits it back out into my HTML. That's what it does, right? But depending on the supporting browsers, you may get this. So we most often have to handle a search form with styles and JavaScript, right? Or else you won't get proper search functionality. The one thing I want to handle here is the idea of patterning. And we're going to talk about radio buttons next week again. So even if I don't cover things, forms are really, really, really important. And we're kind of running out of time today. And I'm probably going to cover them again next week, a little bit of next week. And that's sometimes we have to do that. We have to kind of push things off. So I'm going to probably talk about forms again. I'm going to stop at radio buttons today. But next week, I'm going to give you a bit of a lab to do to create a form. And this is kind of a bigger PowerPoint. If you notice, my PowerPoint's typically around 35 or 40 slides, and I've kind of done that. But there's probably another 30 slides to go here because of the detail. So let's save what we have, and I'll put what I have up on GitHub, right? I'll save what I have. And so for next week, we'll continue with this example. All right, so I'm going to kind of go up on GitHub
Is this going to be
and,
uploaded?
and pump it up, yeah. Updated contact form. So that's that. So that I've saved it up to GitHub, so you have that. And now I'm going to save my recording. So see you next time, guys.